Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name's Katie, I'm an artist and illustrator living in the UK, and today I'm going to be showing you half of my sketchbook and doing a flip through. I'm going to talk about the sketchbook I use and all of the pieces in here in the video, so I really hope you enjoy watching. So this is an A5 Royal Talens sketchbook. It's 13 by 21 I think, and this is the exact same type of sketchbook that I did my previous sketchbook tour in, and I'll link that up in the cards if you're interested in seeing my previous sketchbook. Both this one and the other one is filled with pieces from my daily art challenge. So most of my pieces go in here, or some of them have also gone into my A4 sketchbook, and some are loose, but most of them are in here, so if you watch my daily art recap videos you'll probably recognise most of these. I really like this size, it's really easy to carry if I do plein air work, and it doesn't feel too daunting, it feels quite easy to fill. This sticker on the front is by Joanna Clay, and I'll link her in the description down below for both her Instagram and her YouTube. So I always skip this first page because it's kind of stuck together, so I always skip this one, and this is the first piece that I did. This was done in tandem with another piece in my A4 sketchbook, and so I worked on these two paintings together. This was done with gouache and then finished with coloured pencils. You can see here where I use a lot of mixed media in this sketchbook, it kind of seeps through, so that's not great if you're going to scan it, but I try to photograph my pieces as soon as I've done them, so it's only an issue if I want to turn it into prints, but I can fix that on Photoshop, so it's not too much of an issue. I find these sketchbooks work really well with mixed media. They do struggle with a lot of very wet media, so although I do water down my gouache quite a lot, it does hold it quite well. And I do find that sometimes when it buckles it tends to flatten out a bit, especially once you've closed it and given it some time. The weight of the other pages help to flatten it out. So this is a piece that I drew plein air in a park in Southampton. This, you can see, it's very messy. Whenever I do plein air work I usually have my partner with me, and so I'm always conscious of time. I don't want to hold him up too much, although he is very patient. I think on this one I was running out of time because of parking. So this is really rough and messy, but I really am proud of this tree. I think that works really nicely. I don't use this brown Tombow very much, but I think it works really nicely here. And then this is a lot of Tombow brush pens, some NeoColor and coloured pencils. So I don't love this one, it's very messy, but there are elements I do like. This one was very different for me because I very rarely draw people and I don't often do a scene. So this was quite experimental, but it was really interesting to see how my style would translate into something like this. Obviously I do a lot of landscapes and I was feeling really confident with my style of landscape, so I wanted to see how I could translate that. So this definitely feels more me. I think you can still tell it's my style even though it's a very different subject. I really struggle with people because I never know how to do their faces, there's just so many options. So I definitely could experiment and practice a bit more. But overall I think this gives a really nice tranquil feeling, and I really like the softness of the background. This is a panel spread using Map Crunch, so I remember this is in Australia, and these are kind of my go-to pieces when I'm not sure on what to draw. I really enjoy filling panel spreads and doing things like this. This was done with coloured pencils, NeoColors and brush pens again, so there's no gouache here. And I used both Tombows and Ecolines. And I really like this one. It is quite busy and full, but I think it works together. You can see that it's from the same street, so Map Crunch is a random Google Maps generator. It took me to this street in Australia, and then I just sort of moved around on the Google Maps Street View and drew the different houses that were around. I really enjoy working in different size panels as well, and the little touches, so there's some trolleys here and a little car here. And the sign, I really enjoy adding those in. This is another plein air piece. This was done whilst dropping my partner off at work. And I don't really like this one. I definitely struggled with the lake. It's not a very blue lake, it's man-made, and it was quite an overcast day, so the water was very grey. I do like how I stylised this office building back here. I think, considering it's just two brush pens and some lines, I think it still really shows that it's a building with some windows. And I do like these trees, but I definitely struggled with the layout and I don't love this lake. Obviously, that's like the main element of this spread, so I was slightly disappointed with this one. Another panel spread, this was part of Emma Carlisle's Patreon, and I really enjoy being part of her drawing sessions. And again, this was, I think it was Map Crunch or Google Street View, and I think this was either in Norway or Finland, but I usually do my panels with like this orangey red pencil to draw the panels, whereas on this one I used blue for the first time and I also didn't round the corners. And that was surprising to me how much it actually changes the sketches. And these are quite loose, you can see I did them in 10 minutes and this one in 8 because it's a lot smaller. And I did use gouache for this one. I put down the sky and the main elements first, and then I added in the details with coloured pencils and brush markers. So I used a Tombow here for the water and also for some of these landscape details. This one was a spread that I definitely struggled with. I really like how I've done the animals, so I mixed the paint on the page and then that created all of this texture of like the okapi's fur. But I really struggled with the background because I didn't want it super detailed, so I was trying to get it to be like pushed back into the distance but still have enough detail there to be interesting. I do really like this baby okapi's face, but I don't think that the capuchin works. It doesn't really look like it's sat there. And that wasn't on the original reference picture, and I think you can tell. This one is my first urban street scene, so I filmed the process for this one on my Patreon as well as the next one just to show my process for rural versus urban. But I really love how this one turned out. This was a reference from a photo I found on a local news site and it just really took my eye because of the sunset. And I'm really happy with this one. I was definitely practicing drawing cars, but I think they worked out and turned out really nicely. It is quite messy and loose, but I think there's enough detail there that it's not too busy or overwhelming, and I think you can really get the feeling that it is sunset here. So this one was done in the same Patreon video as the other one. This one is in Gouache's head in Cornwall. Again, I think this was a Google Maps image, and this is definitely my landscape style. This is how I feel really comfortable creating landscapes, and I really enjoy doing scenes like this with like the cliffs and the sea. This was inspired by a piece in my previous sketchbook at the end of that one, and it's definitely very similar, and I used that one as like a jumping off point to create this. I really enjoy doing these patterns in the waves and adding all this texture, and this is a mix of gouache, brush pens, coloured pencils and NeoColors. I also really enjoy adding pops of pink into my landscapes. I think that works really nicely. And then this was actually a redraw of a piece I did like a few years back, and I wanted to see doing the exact same subject and same reference on how much my style has evolved. So I'll pop that on screen so you can see the difference, but I was really happy with this one. I definitely don't love the colours. I think it's a bit, although I use bright colours, it's a bit garish and I don't love the green of this house. But you can see I've really come on in terms of like my perspective, and I really enjoyed doing and working out the angles of this house. This is more stylized in the sky, but a really nice challenge to see how my style has changed. This one was another one done plein air. This was done at Easter. I went to my parents' house and we had a family barbecue, and this is the view of the back of their house where I was just sat at the bottom of their garden. And I've never actually drawn this view despite growing up in this house, so it's really nice. I remember sitting on the bench and having like my family come up and see what I was doing, and so I get really lovely memories from this one, although I don't really love how it turned out. I think this tree isn't quite right, but I do like how I stylised the house, and I do like these two little black birds I've added in there. So another one where you can see is very similar to this one in how I create my landscapes, and I really like the texture in this one. I do think I overworked it a bit. I think this is a little bit too busy, but I do like the breaks I've added here, and again this was referenced from Google Maps and created with gouache, coloured pencils, NeoColors and brush pens. So this one is referenced from photos that my brother and sister-in-law took in North Wales, And I was really taken by the reference photos. It felt very fairy tale like and ethereal, and I really wanted to try and capture the distance in this spread. So I can find it quite tricky to do that, so I really wanted to water down the gouache and create really light pastel shades back here to show that this was further in the distance and a little bit misty. And then I added in more details closer up, so with the leaves and things. And I really like this one because of the feeling it gives me. I love the pops of pink and the way that this feels like a different place, even though it is in the UK. And I also really like how I've gone edge to edge. I think that really helps to immerse the viewer into this scene. This one was just a quick 15-minute fish. This was done on an odd orange stationery drawing session. So these were really quick. I just used gouache and then I added on details with NeoColors and coloured pencils. It's quite dirty and messy because of the NeoColors, but I definitely think this is charming even though it is a really quick spread. So another panel spread done with Matte Crunch. You can see I've gone back to the red pencil outlines and rounded corners for my panels. But for these ones I just took 5 minutes, so I did 5 minutes per panel on a timer and used a limited colour palette. So I really enjoy adding the colours here. Matte Crunch took me to Luxembourg and I really am pleased with this one. I think it was really successful. I really enjoyed doing the line work with the navy, which isn't something I would normally do if I didn't have this limited colour palette. And this one was definitely hardest because it is the biggest panel to do in 5 minutes, so it's definitely the messiest, but it definitely feels quite charming, this spread, and I really enjoyed the pink accents. So this is another piece which was referenced from my brother and sister-in-law's trip to North Wales. It's really helpful to get reference pictures from other people if they don't mind sending you their holiday snaps, and I was really taken by the colours in that photo. And I'm really pleased with all of the trees here. Instead of just doing green trees, I really upped the saturation on the photo to create it into here, and I really love how the pink and burgundy works. You can see here I've added in a lot of texture on the water because there was a lot of movement here, and then there's a train station over here and some buildings over here, and I think it all works really nicely. It doesn't feel too overwhelming, and this was a really enjoyable one to create, and I really like the texture. These were 2 very quick paintings done with acrylic. I didn't think much of this one. They didn't take me very long, but it was more an experiment in using an orange background layer. So you can see I created these panels first with some orange acrylic and then used acrylic again and really played with my brush to try and create this texture and these marks. So it was a really fun one to create, but it didn't take me very long and I didn't think that they were very good, but it was more an experiment in using acrylic, and so although it is messy and not very refined, I really like the mark making. This one was another one done plein air. So this was a solo drawing day. I took myself off to a local nature reserve, and I don't usually take paints, so this was an experiment in taking paints with me and not just using my Tombows and Ecoline brush pens, but actually using my gouache outside. And I don't love this one. I again tried to create the distance by making these paler. I quite like this tree, I like the contrast, and I do like the fence detail, but I mostly like my plein air pieces because it takes me back to that day, but I don't think this one was that successful. These ones were referenced from some National Geographic magazines, so I have quite a few of those magazines that I picked up at a car boot sale, and I wanted to do 15-minute timepieces for some photos in there. I definitely prefer this one, which is the big redwoods at National Park. I'm not very happy with this one, despite it seeming simpler than this one. I struggled more with this one, and having the lake look like a lake. It was really hard to do that in the time frame, and it just feels a bit empty. Whereas this one I really enjoy doing, and I like that there's a tiny man down here to show the scale. I definitely prefer drawing trees compared to empty blank spaces like this, so this one is definitely my favourite. This one I haven't shared before. This one isn't part of my daily art challenge, but it was part of a Patreon drawing session with Emma Carlisle, and this was a narrative one, so I created these panels and used the references that Emma had collected, and then I wrote the story afterwards. So each panel was 5 minutes and I used gouache and just a coloured pencil here. And then once the timer was up, I went back in and created a narrative for them. So on the back of that narrative session, I then moved on to this one, which I'm still really proud of and I'm really happy I created. So again, this was on Emma's drawing session and she curated these references, and then I created this narrative around the pieces that I'd drawn. I added on the words with brown paper and I really like the way that looks. It's quite an ominous story, but I think without them it would be like a very different feeling to this page. So I don't often put narrative in my work, so it was a really interesting exercise and I really enjoyed how this turned out. This one I don't think was successful at all. This is some shop fronts using references from the shopkeeper's account on Instagram, and I'll try and link anything that I've mentioned and reference wise down below. But I really didn't like how wishy-washy this one is. I do like the details in the windows and some of like the more refined details out the front, but I definitely struggled in creating like the structure. I think it's a bit too washed out, and so I'm definitely not very pleased with this one, but it was a good starting point because I did come back to this and create something else in my A4 sketchbook as part of the daily challenge. This one again was inspired by the narrative session from Emma, but this time I found my own references just on a copyright-free image site, and then I put myself on a 10-minute timer for each panel. So this is really rough and messy, and I don't love this one, certainly not as much as this one, but it was interesting to carry on that narrative that I hadn't used before, and I didn't add text or words to this one, but I do feel like they are linked together even though the images weren't, like they were just random pictures I found on the copyright-free site. This one obviously was hardest because it's the biggest panel to do in 10 minutes, and I do find that I prefer this side of the spread, and I really like the backpack and the squirrel here, but this one is a bit too messy for me. So some more panels, again 5 minutes, and I think this was another map crunch spread. This was actually a Patreon video that I filmed real time, so you can see like I was definitely very rushed. I started doing the sky with a Tombow and then I realised I didn't like that, so I changed and used my new Luminance. This was on the week where I first got some Luminance pencils, so it was a good way to try out the limited colour palette because I only had a few of them and create just using those. And I also used some Tombows and Ecoline brush pens, which I find quicker than using gouache. So although these are very messy and they were done in 5 minutes, again I think it's quite charming and I really enjoy working to a timer. This is another spread which I think I worked in tandem again with the larger A4 sketchbook, so it's a really nice way to learn from like the bigger one and applying it to a smaller one. This was a view in Cornwall, again on Google Maps, and I think I preferred the bigger one, but I definitely learned a lot from that one to apply to this one. I really like the little houses in the distance, the addition of the pink, and also the marks on the water, which is definitely part of my style now. Another one which is very different for me because we've got like an interior shot and then a person in this one. I really like this one. I think the orange and the contrast with the green works really nicely. This one was very different for me. This was part of a Room Portrait Club Instagram prompt, so it was nice to try something different, and I do think that they sit nicely together despite being like nothing to do with each other. I do struggle with creating like the contrast. I think you can see I was a bit nervous on this one, but I do like the way they sit together. I'm really happy with this one. This was inspired by a storm that we had and using a picture that I found on a copyright-free site, and I really was focusing on the sky. Most of the time, as you've seen, I just do blue skies, so it was really fun to add more colour and really create that energy in the sky, and you'll see how this influenced another piece. I was really happy with this one. I love how the purple sits with the yellow, and this was definitely a changing point in my art challenge because I'd only ever done like plain skies before, but I really was happy with this one and I still am. So this is another stormy piece inspired by this one, and this one I'm not sure on because it feels a bit too energetic, like there's too much going on. Obviously there's a lot of texture in the sky, but there's also a lot going on down here. But I do feel like it works because obviously if it is a storm there's going to be a lot going on, and I feel like I might have overworked this one. I did add some collage down here which I think works, and I really like the pop of orange there. There's a lot going on in the sea, in the sky, some sheep and some fencing over here. So I think it does work for the mood of the piece. It feels very dramatic, and I do like the colour palette I've used here as well, even though there's a lot going on. I really like how the sky is so different from the warm colours in the foreground. This is a piece that I never finished, so that wasn't part of the daily challenge. I meant to add in some gouache, so this is all done with brush pens and coloured pencils, and I wanted to add in some blues here, but I never got around to finishing it. This is the piece that I used for my 10k giveaway. This was referenced from Google Maps. This was just done in one evening rather than part of the daily art challenge, and it was more just an experiment in, again, instead of showing a storm, I wanted to show the energy in the sky and try and draw the clouds in a different way, and I wasn't sure if it was too much, but it was a really interesting experiment. This one I was surprised at how well this was received on Instagram because I didn't think much of it at the time. Definitely feels very calm. I created this using a negative space technique, and again this is a video on Patreon, but I created these shapes and these colours and painted around this shape of the building. So this is a church and then a house next door, and they were very white, so it worked really well using that technique. And then I went in on top with some brush pens for the shading and some colour pencils and NeoColors. And I really love the contrast. I really like how the white sits with these warmer jewel tones, and it was a really nice technique to try out. So another Google Maps panel spread. Again, you can see I've gone with the limited colours and then the panels. This was in the Netherlands, and I really like how this turned out. I like how the sky is linking them all together. This again is in the same neighbourhood. And like I said, this is like my go-to when I'm stuck for what to draw, so you'll see a lot of these in the sketchbook. But I really like drawing them. They don't take a lot of effort on my part. I don't spend ages trying to find the perfect reference. So I find them really easy to do for my daily art challenge. This one was done plein air again. This was in the forest, and it was a really lovely day, so we just pulled into this picnic spot and then I drew the view. It is again very rough and messy. You can really see here where I was influenced by the sky pieces from earlier. So it's really interesting to see the progression through this book and seeing what worked and what influenced what pieces. It's definitely rough and messy down here. I used brush pens, colour pencils and NeoColors, and there's a lot of movement even though it's a very still day. I do really like the maroon and the pink though. I think that really breaks up what was a very green landscape. This was a piece done using a reference that I'd taken from one of my Patreon reference shares. So every month I curate some references and share them with my patrons. And this was in May, so it was map month. And this was a map crunch view which I stumbled across. I think it was in Mexico. And I really ramped up the saturation again. It was a very picturesque view. I really like the water. I think that works really nicely with this gradient here. I was disappointed with over here. I had this sandy beach and it definitely felt like something was missing. So I added in some collage here, but I don't think I did the shadow very well. I probably overworked it again with the cliff, and it's quite a simple one, but I do like the colours. So this one was an experiment in using acrylics and trying to do a floral painting of a new plant that I'd got. And I'm not happy with this one. I almost didn't want to post it, but part of the daily art challenge is to just post what you create. I liked it a lot more when I added in the stripes. I think that helped add some interest to the piece, but this isn't one that I'm very proud of. But again, I really do enjoy using acrylic and creating the brush marks and texture. This one was another one done plein air. This was a drawing session with my friend Kate, who's Hey Hey Ginger Art on Instagram, and it was really nice to be with someone and just spend the whole day creating. Again, it was a really lovely day. We just sat in a park in Southampton and then drew the views in front of us. And I was really happy with these because it felt like it had merged my plein air drawing with the pieces I create in a studio. Oftentimes, the reason I don't love my plein air stuff is because it doesn't feel like the way I create at home, whereas this one did, and I was really happy with the colours. And this was like an arch which had some wisteria on, but it wasn't in bloom, so it was quite a tricky composition, but I think it worked out really nicely. So this was actually a really quick spread, but I really like how this one turned out. Again, I've done the panels, but I've added more in than normal and done the square corners, and I just used a really generic search term of nature on a copyright-free image site, and then really quickly drew them as like rough thumbnails. And this doesn't have any gouache on. Again, this is NeoColor's coloured pencils and brush pens, and I really like how this one turned out. I think it worked really well having this small thumbnails, and I really like this as a spread. These next three were really quick experiments, again using Google Maps, so I just randomly drop a pin on Google. I think this was down in Devon or Cornwall, and I drew the same view, but really tried to keep things loose and speedy. So this was NeoColor's coloured pencils and brush pens. So you can see it's the exact same view. I'm not sure how long I spent on this one, but this one was 10 minutes and I was really trying to do the same view in a different style. This is how I normally approach things and colour things in, whereas this one is using line work a bit more, and again using some limited colours. So this was the view over the river, and then once I turned the camera angle a little bit, this was what was sat there. And it is very rough and messy, and I don't love them, but it was really nice to create really fast things. Usually I just do one piece or one spread for the daily art challenge. So it was nice to fill up the sketchbook in this way and try and get that energy down. This was another one that was done in 10 minutes, and again trying to use a different style for me, and I do really like the colours. So this one marks exactly halfway through the sketchbook, and because I've rambled on long enough, I'm going to do the other half in another video. So that's half of this sketchbook. Like I said at the beginning, this is filled with most of my daily art pieces, and it's really lovely to flip through and see the progression. And because I am so close to finishing this one, there will be another sketchbook flip through soon where I do the other half of this sketchbook. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next Sunday with a new video. See you later.